Off you go.
Okay, welcome everybody, and I guess I'll say Happy New Year. It's getting a little old, but Happy New Year nevertheless. Haven't seen most of you this year. Um, your luck. I don't have a lot to talk about tonight. As you've heard, our guest speaker tonight is Njal Rollinson. He's going to be speaking about the incredible natural history of local amphibians and reptiles, highlights from 7 years of research in Algonquin Park. We're going to get to him in just a moment. A little bit of club business to get through. Treasurers asked me to remind you all that if you haven't paid your dues for 2025, now's the time. Reminder that you can pay either by e-transfer to, I believe that's right behind you, treasurer at mpfn.xyz, or you can send it by snail mail, and I've got that written down here somewhere, to Box 393, Midland, Ontario, L4R4L1. So if you haven't paid, or if you don't know whether you're paid or not, get in touch with our treasurer and they'll let you know. Um, the other thing I want to brag a bit about was how much money we raised for the Owl Foundation at our Christmas potluck this year. I don't know if this is a record, but it's certainly the highest since I've been a member. We raised $710 for the Owl Foundation, and I think that's really really good. The Owl Foundation is one of our favorite charities, and I'm really pleased that we could help them out in this way. As a result, hey, somebody gave me a hand clap. I like that. uh, as a result of our contribution, we now have two passes for two people each to tours of the All Foundation. Um, they're available to anybody who may be interested. So if you think you might want to go, you can either contact us, contact Ken or myself, or you can just raise your hand or put it into the chat that you're interested in going. It's a really interesting tour. You have to book individual appointment times with the Owl Foundation, but if you're interested, we'll help you out in getting you through that. Um, Speaking of the Owl Foundation and the Christmas bird count and our Christmas potluck dinner, I understand that uh, Dave Scanlon has a few words to tell us about the results of our Christmas bird count. You ready to take over, Dave?
Let me find Dave and
Yep.
and highlight him here.
Oh boy.
I'm going to take a pin off you and put it on Dave. Okay, Dave, there you go.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Well, this year it was held on December the 14th. I guess we were kind of lucky. I guess leading up to the day, I guess the weather wasn't great, but we lucked out for this day, sunshine, and so as a result, we had about 7,400 birds seen, which is the second for us all time. Last year was the best at just over 8,000, but we had 58 people take part this year, which was wonderful. It made it easy to, set the groups up. And we seen 59 different species. Now, of course, the highlight of the day was a Townsend Solitude that was seen, I think, at the bottom of concession 5. Sorry, Solitaire. One question that I was wondering was, I guess, what's the chances of that bird still, I guess, living? Like, is it able to live here in the winter, or?
I can hazard a guess.
Sure.
There had been one showed up in Washago, maybe 2, 3 winters ago, and it hung around there through the entire winter. It had a really good supply of food. There was a very abundant crop of crab apples. It hung around there until the robins started coming back, at which point they outcompeted it and it moved on. Hopefully it survived, but it survived all winter. So my belief is if they can find a source of food, they'll hang in there.
Wonderful. So what happens with it? Does it make its way back out west again, or? Who knows?
I asked some knowledgeable birders about that, and you
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
don't want to hear the answer. They probably don't survive
Okay.
long term.
Yeah, in general, this is a bird with a faulty compass.
Yeah.
Who should have gone a little bit south, and it says instead he went a long way east.
Right.
So his long-term prospects are not good. And of course, a lot of birds don't survive that long anyways, and he's not going to find a mate in Ontario. So anyways, we wish him all the
Okay.
best.
Um, so that's basically the highlights. Like we had 17 groups, and probably for the potluck we had what, close to 30 people I think show up, and like I guess what was reported, we raised about $700, which was great. Always nice to have Bob up front, trying to raise some money there with his antics playing Santa there, so that always works out very well. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to say other than next year. I guess the count date has to be between December 14th and I guess early January. So next year the 14th is on a Sunday, and at some point in time in the future we'll be talking about I guess whether we want to wait to December 20th, which is I guess the closest Saturday within the count period, but it's starting to get a little close to Christmas. But we'll I guess work that out later on, and that's about all I have to say about it. It's just we had a really good day, and I think everybody had a good time. So I'd just like to thank everybody that I guess took part. Made my job easier. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you once again. That you've been organizing the Christmas bird count for as long as I've been a member. I don't know how far back you go with it. You do a great job. I know it's got to be tedious putting all these teams together and compiling maps, and you do a lot of hard work that goes unnoticed, but it doesn't go unappreciated. So thank you, Dave, and thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Not much else to talk about. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Paul Rollinson if he's here, and he's going to introduce his son, Niall, and tell us all about what we're going to hear. All right. Paul, are you out there?
So I just recently spoke to Paul, and so Paul was compelled to update all of his Zoom software before he was able to log in. So Paul is unsure about when he's going to be able to log in. He's hoping, and you can tell that he's hoping by virtue of the fact that I'm trying to draw out very long sentences here. He'll be in momentarily, but I can't guarantee that, and neither can he. So in the absence of Paul, and maybe I should introduce myself,
That
or
works. Or we can have Ken introduce you. He normally introduced most of our guest speakers. Your choice.
well, I
Ready?
don't.
Here we go. Here's Niall. There you go. That's the introduction.
Sounds good. So I think my dad. You know what? Well, maybe we'll give an opportunity to my dad to introduce me after the talk because he's probably prepared something. But maybe I'll just go ahead and give the talk because we're not sure when he's going to get in. So I'll go ahead here and I'll share my screen and we'll hope this works. We did a trial run. We did due diligence, and it did work. Hold on here. Let me actually try this again. Screen two, PowerPoint. Try sharing that way. So hold on. One more try here. Just hoping that I'd be able to. Okay, this will work. All right, you can all see my screen.
Right now we're seeing. No,
There you
we're
go.
good now. Now we're good now.
Okay, excellent. I guess Paul had technical difficulties. He's not here. I'm Njal Rollinson. I'm an associate
Wait a
professor.
second. Wait a second. Hold the horses. Hold the
Whoa.
horses.
Whoa.
Somebody named Paul Rollinson has just entered the waiting room. Let's see if he manages to connect.
Paul Rollinson has entered the building. This is amazing.
Such anticipation.
Let's see if he's really here. There he is. There's Paul.
You made it in the nick of time. I was just saying,
Boy, that's cutting it close, Paul.
That's a dramatic entrance if ever there was one.
Well, yeah, he said give him a few minutes, but I didn't really mean to cut it this close. So yeah, yeah. Am I supposed to say something now?
Yeah, you're supposed to introduce your son.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I was thinking about what to say because it's hard to introduce my son in a sense. I was just thinking that the only reason, like, it's really cool that you guys are a wonderful, wonderful group of people who will listen to someone who's been working really hard at what they love to do, which is be out in nature. Like, and all of you guys are naturally obsessed. Pardon the pun, Ken. But Niall is as well, and I just thought, wow, it's so great that he's got an audience to talk to that would actually understand both what he's trying to do and what he is doing. And perhaps just a quick anecdote. I don't know whether I've ever told this anecdote to Niall, but when I was growing up in Richmond Hill, the first property I remember living on was in near the mill pond. The property was a lot, but it went down to the mill pond. So the back of our lot was a wetland, and right next to us there was a forest. So when I was young, up to about 12, my haunt was kind of hanging out at the mill pond. I fished for perch, and I sort of messed around at the foot of the property, and I guys watched tadpoles and stuff like that. So having an environment in which you can kind of just explore when you're young is really incredibly important, and that holds true for Niall in his experience, because he had the Wye Marsh and he had Georgian Bay, and he worked at the marsh as well. And working at the research station, I know all of the hard work that all of the students did. They were up at 4 a.m. out there doing their turtle thing, and I was there in the winter when Niall was doing his research. So it's a lot of hard work, and I totally understand it. But the one anecdote I'm just going to tell that Niall may not remember is when I was at the mill pond, living next to the mill pond in Richmond Hill. There was one year where I went and the mill pond was there, and then the mill was down below the bridge. And one day I came and I saw this turtle that wasn't in the mill pond. He was way down at the foot of by the mill. And I thought, well, what the hell is that turtle doing down there? So I picked him up and carried him all the way back and plunked him in the pond, right? And so the next day I went, and sure enough, the damn turtle he was gone across the road, and he was down by the mill again. So I picked him up and took him back and put him in the pond. And I never realized until much later in my life that I actually was doing a disservice to the turtles. Have I ever told you that story, Niall?
No, but yeah, it's good you realize.
So anyway, yeah. So that's my introduction. I hope I hope that's enough, Ken.
It was worth the wait. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so my dad's right though. I mean, I grew up, partly at the Odd Copy Bookshop, and the back door or the backyard of the Odd Copy Bookshop is essentially the Wye Marsh. There was a back door there, and I could get into the Wye Marsh almost any time I'd like, and I'd be in there kind of mucking around, and it eventually evolved into becoming a receptionist at the Wye Marsh, then a naturalist at the Wye Marsh, and then, I went to school, and here I am. So I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the right environment. So yeah, let me get this laser pointer, and let's move along. So I always like to orient us to start. So I grew up. I guess it's right around here. This is where Wye Marsh is, and where the Odd Copy Bookshop is. But now my research takes place over here, and this is the Algonquin Highlands. And my students and I are incredibly lucky that we get to do research here. This is a wilderness. This is a picture of a wilderness zone just north of the research station, which I'm about to show you. And there's places here. There's lakes here that probably no human, and First Nations included, have ever kind of swam in or possibly even seen directly. It's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers where there's no access. In theory, there's no tourists allowed. It's just wild country right here in central Ontario. This is where the Red Fox River meets the North Madawaska and combines into the Madawaska River and flows south within this wilderness zone, right into Lake Sassajewan. And Lake Sassajewan is one of the first places for, hundreds of kilometers where you see the first footprint of people. So here's the Lake Sassajewan Dam, and here's another footprint. This is the Station Road. It goes through the forest up to this peninsula up here where the wildlife research station is. And this research station has been there since, I think it's sometime in the 40s. It's a very old research station. And this is where we do the bulk of our research. This is the main cookhouse at the Wildlife Research Station where they serve us breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and where, people from a variety of different universities come every summer and, put their heads together and exchange ideas and do interesting research. It's a different community every year. It's a roll of the dice about the personalities that come together. We have quirks, like we dress up and we celebrate half Christmas. We get a tree in, we exchange presents. This is on June 25th. So it's a very, very exciting and interesting place to work out of. And it was established a very long time ago, and it supports long-term research as well as other types of research. So for my part, I'm the principal investigator or co-principal investigator on, I guess, 3 different life history projects, 3 different long-term projects. One on amphibians that was established, well, I guess, arguably in 2008 or 1990, depending on how you see it. And it's been running until the present. Another study on snapping turtles that's been established in 1972, so 8 years before I was born. How do I do it? Well, actually, I inherited these studies. I'm not supernatural. I inherited these studies from my predecessor, whom I'll introduce in a minute, and a long-term study of painted turtles as well. And so what I thought I'd do today, so we do a lot of different things in my group. We do a lot of fundamental research. We use these long-term individual-based data to ask questions about how climate change is affecting growth and reproduction and things of that nature. We ask more fundamental questions about why do traits evolve in the first place? Why did temperature-dependent sex determination, for example, evolve? But fundamentally, the students and I are really interested in natural history. So not only do we kind of, do, hardcore sciencey stuff, but we also do a lot of natural history work. And I thought what I'd share today are some, interesting discoveries. At least 3 of which are kind of arguably strongly natural history related that I think are really interesting that my group was involved with. 1 with amphibians, 2 with snapping turtles, and 1, if I get here, this kind of horrific story about painted turtles. But we'll get there in time. And the first thing I'd say about this is this work isn't mine. At this point in my career, I like getting into the field, but fundamentally, I've become much more of an administrator. And it's my students that do all of the heavy lifting, all of the hard work. Much of the work I'm going to present today was actually the work of Patrick Muldoon. He was a PhD student in my group, graduated recently. I learned at least as much from him, if not more, than he learned from me. He's an incredible scientist and an incredible scholar. Claudia Lacroix, she did a lot of the behavioral ecology work that I'm going to present. Ron Brooks, who died a year and a half ago now, founded these projects with his graduate students, and Jackie Litskis collaborates in co-supervising these long-term studies. All right, so let's start. We're familiar with the location, I guess, of Lake Sassajewan now. So I thought what we'd do is we'd leave Lake Sassajewan behind, and we just go a little bit south to this interesting lake, this heart-shaped lake, appropriately, in the middle of the park, called Bat Lake. And it's at Bat Lake where this incredible phenomenon happens every year. So this is a spotted salamander. It's doing the same thing it does either every year or every other year. It's migrating to Bat Lake to breed. And in Bat Lake, it's this interesting environment because it attracts amphibians, we think, from throughout the landscape. It's this lake that has no fish in it because it's so acidic. So it's a fishless lake, and because of that, amphibians go absolutely gangbusters in this lake. This is spotted salamanders breeding. There's a female in the middle. You can see she's a little bit more pudgy than the males because she's full of eggs. And all these males, I mean, this video doesn't do it justice. Males get really really excited during mating season when there's a female in the water. Like they lose their brains. They start swimming like crazy. They go absolutely bananas. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to move the female towards their quote unquote sperm garden. So the males will put spermatophores on the soil, or sorry, on the substrate, that look a little bit like this. This isn't my photo. And they're trying to encourage the female to go pick up their spermatophore with her cloaca. But they get so excited and it gets so competitive that what they do is that they start laying spermatophores on top of other male spermatophores. So eventually you have these leaning towers of spermatophores that the females just aren't even sure what to do with anymore, because the males are, of course, trying to get their spermatophore up highest in this weird game of one-upmanship. So it's this really interesting and cool mating season. It's an amazing thing to see because we literally have thousands and thousands of salamanders breeding in Bat Lake every year. Quick side note, spotted salamanders, why are they spotted? In fact, if you look through the kind of the family tree of salamanders, you can see that this pattern, this spot-related pattern, has evolved multiple independent times. That it's not only just found in spotted salamanders. If you think about turtles like the spotted turtle, which we also have in Ontario, it has a remarkably similar spot pattern. And we don't really know why this is. Why does this pattern keep different places? What's its purpose? It's not totally clear. So if any of you know, please tell me, because I would love to study it. So we don't know why they're spotted, but we know what we study and why we study it. So we study them at Bat Lake. I'll just focus on the part relevant to the natural history note that I want to give you. So in 2017, we got really into this study. What we wanted to do, and this was kind of the height of the first Trump era, and Trump was all about, let's build a wall, you remember that? So we decided, yeah, let's build a wall, but for salamanders. So we actually built a wall that stopped salamanders around the whole lake. And the goal was to have a lot of students involved in surveying the fence so that we could literally count every single salamander that went in. And after they've mated and after the eggs hatch and the metamorphs come out, every single salamander that comes out. And you might get, parsec watching this, but this is just a quick video that gives you an appreciation of how long and how far this fence went. And importantly, this is really, really cool because, of course, we count all of the egg masses that are in that lake. And so we know in the end how many eggs actually survive to metamorphosis, because we can then count all of the metamorphs that are coming out of the lake. So it was important to have this fence for a few years. And now in this video, what we're going to see is a quick picture of that lake to give you a sense of what it actually looks like. Cool. So a beautiful kind of, miromictic, it's called, lake. And because it's really acidic, there's not a lot of nitrogen for plants. The plants have to deal with a low nutrient environment. One species that thrives in these low nutrient environments are pitcher plants. And as naturalists, you probably know why this is, but pitcher plants are in fact carnivorous plants. They eat insects. And so you can see the little teeth on the picture here. The animal or the insects are attracted to the fluid, which is part enzymatic. In the water, they eventually get stuck in the water, and the plant digests them, and it gets extra nitrogen from these plants, which helps them persist in these really nutrient deficient bogs. And so during our fall surveys for these metamorphs, I should say during Patrick Muldowan's fall surveys for these metamorphs, he came upon a really, really interesting observation. So he's looking for these metamorphs at the fence, he's counting them, he's diligently measuring them, and he's walking around, and all of a sudden, he sees this. What is going on here? We have salamanders, baby salamanders that just kind of, turned into juvenile salamanders from being tadpoles that have somehow made their way into a pitcher plant. And in fact, in this case, there's two of them in the same plant. And so the more he looked, the more he found plant after plant after plant. He'd be finding salamander after salamander after salamander in these pitcher plants. And, for the most part, well, I shouldn't say for the most part, some of these salamanders were alive and others were very, very much dead. Botanical carnivory. Here is an example of plants eating vertebrates, eating animals with backbones. This is actually pretty remarkable. And the first thing that, of course, comes to mind was a movie that my dad forced me to watch when I was 4 years old, and I've had nightmares about it ever since. We all remember Little Shop of Horrors, for better or for worse. But this is kind of a Little Shop of Horrors in the flesh. And so, like I say, it wasn't just a few pictures that had salamanders in them. There was a lot. So in 2018, when he first discovered this, he did a survey of 67 plants on a few different sampling occasions, and he found 18 salamanders, and that represents 20% of the plants that he surveyed had salamanders in them. He did a more extensive survey in 2019, and 62% of the plants that he surveyed had salamanders in them. And because we know the number of salamanders that actually made their way out of Bat Lake, because we had that Trumpian fence, we were able to calculate what proportion of the population these plants were eating. And it was 5%. 1 in 20 salamanders gets eaten by these plants, at least in some years, which is pretty remarkable. There was a subsequent study that actually showed that it seems as though the plants are actually digesting them and getting nutrients out of them, because there's an enrichment of one of the carbon isotopes or nitrogen isotopes that's associated with vertebrate food in Bat Lake compared to other areas. That was Amanda Semenuk's work from the University of Guelph. So what is going on here? Are the salamanders trying to get into these plants and dying, or are they just kind of accidentally falling into them? So there's kind of two different alternate explanations. One is it's an accident because the plants are in their way and they kind of fall into them on their way out. And the other is that maybe they're kind of going to look for food. They're going to look for bugs around the plants, because there often is kind of bugs crawling along the lips of these pitcher plants, and then they accidentally fall in. And so this is one of the things Patrick could kind of test. The idea being, if the pitchers are facing the bog, then it's more likely that it's just an interception idea. The salamander is walking along, it kind of goes up the plant and falls in by accident, not knowing what it's doing. But if the salamanders are actually seeking out these plants for food or for some other reason, then maybe plants that are perpendicular or facing away from the bog might be at least as likely, or might have a similar likelihood of the direct facing plants for salamanders falling in. And so based on the data, it seems like it's just an accident. It seems like the salamanders are kind of crawling out of Bat Lake and falling right into these plants, because there were many more salamanders in the direct facing plants that were the pitchers facing the bog, compared to pitchers that were facing away from the bog. So it doesn't seem like they're seeking out these pitcher plants and trying to get into them for some reason. They're just falling in. But there you have it. So, the next time you're walking through the forest, you just, keep your eye out, because you never know what might happen. There's really incredible things going on out there right under our noses that we don't even know about until you start looking carefully. So yeah, that was an interesting story about pitcher plants. And so I thought I'd move on from amphibians and talk a little bit about snapping turtles now. So we're gonna leave Bat Lake behind. We're gonna move back to Lake Saskatchewan, and that's kind of again where the research station is. And beneath the waters of Lake Saskatchewan, beneath these murky waters, there's lots of snapping turtles. And it's not just beneath the waters of Lake Saskatchewan, it's also beneath Broadwing, Lake Catlin, and a number of interconnected lakes up to 10 kilometers away. It all forms part of the same population. And this is a population that we sample every year. We catch these turtles, we see how much they've grown, we see how many eggs they lay, we mark them so we know who is who, and largely this occurs by virtue of being able to sample them on the Lake Saskatchewan Dam, because they come to the Lake Saskatchewan Dam every year. They come to the Lake Saskatchewan Dam every year and start laying their eggs. So here's the female putting her eggs into the nest. She's not just plopping them in, she's really carefully and meticulously placing them somewhere in the nest, arranging them so that they can all fit in. She's holding herself up by her really muscular tail. That acts as a fourth leg, and she's using her other leg to rearrange those eggs. And they're actually pretty good moms. They do leave their eggs behind to kind of fend for themselves, but they spend a long time carefully packing down these nests, making sure everything is just right. So they're really attentive mothers in that sense. going to skip this one. Like, so C's kind of arranged her nest, and now she's just packing it down, and she's going to be off on her way. All right, so what do we know about these turtles? Because we mark these turtles and we know who is who, we have a fairly good sense of, you know, what they do and who they are. This is turtle B7. She doesn't have the greatest name, but you know, we can't name them all really cool names. So this is turtle B7. B7 was first observed in 1973. So, and she's barely grown since 1973. Now, in turtles, growth is kind of age and size specific. So the bigger and older you are, the less you grow. So if she's barely grown since 1973, it probably means she was already pretty old in 1973 when we first captured her. So we don't know. We can't age turtles well, but she's probably pushing, you know, 80 years, maybe 100 years old. She's a very old turtle. I'd comfortably put money on she's older than anybody in this call. She's laid more than 3,000 eggs in the last 50 years, and she's laying the same number of eggs now as she did in 1973, more or less. It hasn't decreased, in other words. So if we do that math, I mean, shouldn't we all be swimming in snapping turtle hatchlings right now? I mean, if all of these snapping turtles are living so long and they're producing so many eggs, we should be like wading through seas of snapping turtle babies just to get to work, right? Well, no, it's not how it works. It's not how their life history works. So B7, as far as we know, has produced few, if any. We know that she's produced one surviving offspring because we helped that offspring survive, but she's produced few, if any, surviving offspring. And this kind of characterizes the turtle life history. Many of you probably know this as naturalists, but turtle life history is their kind of the arc of their kind of growth and reproduction and death is characterized by really low egg and juvenile survivorship. So like 1 out of, you know, every who knows how many, like, you know, 1,500 eggs survives to maturity on average. But once you get that egg that survives to maturity, they have a really, really high probability of survival after that. And they can lay eggs over, like, you know, 60, 70 years, just pumping these eggs out in the hopes that, you know, they'll be able to replace themselves, so that 1 or 2 eggs out of those 72 years of reproduction would be enough to keep the population stable if 2 eggs survived. And you can see that, though, they're really built like tanks. You know, other than people, what could possibly hurt a snapping turtle or turtles in general, right? But if we take a look at our turtles in Ontario, we have 8 amazing different species. And if we look at how they're assessed by CSIWC, we see that all of them are listed in some capacity or another, ranging from special concern to endangered. So if they're built like tanks and they survive so long and they reproduce so much, you know, what's the problem? What's going on here? And so it turns out the problem is largely us, of course. So this is kind of a roadmap overlaid in Southern Ontario. You can't get more than 1 kilometer from a road, some kind of road, like tertiary, secondary, primary road in Southern Ontario. You can't do it. I've tried. It's impossible. The road network is so extensive. And of course, the road network is commensurate with turtle mortality. So turtles come to the road to lay eggs, and of course they get hit by cars. And so, you know, for something like a population of deer, if you hit a deer, it's not really going to hurt the population, but it really matters for turtles for the reasons I just described. Turtles have to live a really long time in order to replace themselves because their juvenile and hatchling survival is so low. So if you curtail the life of a snapping turtle by, say, 20 years or 30 years by hitting it with a car or something, you're really affecting the reproductive success of that individual and hence the population growth rate. At least in theory, because how do you actually study that? You basically, the only reason we know that is because we have to build these mathematical models that play out over a time scale of a turtle so that we just kind of model these things. But we don't actually know this because how would you actually be able to demonstrate something like that? You can't go into a turtle population, kill a bunch of adults and see what happens. But when you operate a long-term study, you increase the likelihood that you're going to get something remarkable, if not horrible, that happens over the course of your study. So when I said there's not too much that can kill a turtle, I didn't lie. There isn't too much. It's pretty much us, crazy things that would never happen, like elephants, and Otters. Otters are a primary predator of adult turtles, and they can do a lot of damage to turtle populations. This was the scene in 1988 on the Lake Saskatchewan shore after otters decimated the population, the overwintering population in Lake Saskatchewan. And so what they do is they kind of go in and they find where the turtles are hibernating because they hibernate together, possibly for reasons I'll describe in a minute. Turtles are much more social than we thought they were. Um, and they can find like a pocket of hibernated turtles. They drag them up out into the ice and they devour them. And they'll just keep going back down until they can't find anymore. And so on the y-axis here, we have kind of survivorship. 1.0 means you have a 100% chance of survival to the next year. You have a 90% chance of survival to the next year, 80 and so on. And this is just year on the x-axis. And you can see that we have really, really high, this is the survival of the Saskatchewan turtles over time. We have really, really high survival, as you'd expect for a turtle. When the otters come, all of a sudden we have a short period of really low or relatively low survival, 75% chance of surviving for an individual from 1 year to the next. And then it returns to high survival after that and essentially stays at high survival, except this 1 year where the dam broke and a few turtles died. They froze. So to put this a different way, we have survivorship on the y-axis. So we have really high survivorship, except for that period in the late 80s. It goes back to high survivorship. And then we have population size in green. So for example, in the year 1980 here, we have a green dot there. We have about 60 individuals alive in 1980, and that's, say, the case in 75. It's the case in 85. Then all of a sudden, we have this drop in population size. And you know, if you killed a bunch of deer in a population, what should happen? Well, the population would be down for like a year or two, then all of a sudden, whoop, it would go way back up. But again, the life history of these turtles is so slow. They reproduce so slowly, and their chances of recruitment for an individual is so low that they just don't recover, and they stay at really low stable values for an extremely long time, and are even further vulnerable to other kind of mortality events. Like depredation events or the dam bursting. And so the nice thing, and so there's a more recent study which has more complicated graphs because of a really, really smart graduate student that did this study. But the point being that the nice or the interesting thing about the long-term study is it allowed us to capture this serendipitous event, this odd-predation event, and we saw this dramatic increase in mortality that was extremely temporary. And it had, you know, a 20-year or more impact on the population size of these turtles, just as all of these theoretical mathematical models that really smart people make about population ecology predicted. And so we're actually able to verify that with these data. And it's good because then we can make pretty strong conservation recommendations with this type of data. So, for example, in the paper that that kind of documented this and told the story, he said, "We strongly support a risk-averse, precautionary approach to conservation and management of long-lived animals, given their limited ability to compensate for declines and the unpredictable continuing risk that catastrophes pose to depleted populations." So it was really important to be able to demonstrate that with our long-term study, and that's more of kind of a sadder. Arguably, it's a natural history note. It's a sadder note. I'm going to move on to more positive things now and more upbeat things that you may not know. We're going to stick with snapping turtles, but we're going to talk about snapping turtle babies. Have you ever seen anything so cute? I almost promise you that if you think this animal is cute, you're going to think it's even cuter in a second. But first, a little background. So this is a cladogram. It just shows, you know, evolutionary relationships among different groups. So what it's telling us here is that mammals are reasonably distantly related to, you know, this group of reptiles, which is the lizards and snakes, and the tuatara, which is related to those two. And then more closely related here are turtles, crocodiles, and birds. If you didn't know, birds are essentially reptiles. We call the rest of the group here non-avian reptiles. So birds descended from, of course, from dinosaurs. Crocodiles are very closely related to dinosaurs as well. So birds are really closely related to crocodiles and, you know, well, I shouldn't say really close, but relatively closely related to crocodiles and turtles. And what do we know about birds? What's one of their most common characteristic? Well, it's that they sing. of course, right? You can't go a day usually, even in Toronto, without hearing a bird singing. And some of you are natural historians, so you might also know that crocodiles, I wouldn't say they sing, but they also do an awful lot of vocalization, especially in the context of parental care. There's a lot of communication between the mother and the young, and the males bellow. And so if we look at these evolutionary relationships here, would it come as a surprise then if turtles, which are closely related to these two groups that really vocalize a lot, also vocalized? And it turns out over the last 20 years, we've really uncovered a huge amount of evidence that turtles vocalize at all life stages, from the hatchling stage, at the juvenile stage, and at the adult stage. It hasn't been well studied yet, but I would, bet my hat that every single species of turtles vocalizes, because that's been the pattern so far. So this is Claudia Lacroix. She's an incredible behavioral ecologist that went through my group. And she did a lot of work on vocalization in snapping turtles, hatchling snapping turtles in particular. So yes, we know turtles can talk. They vocalize at all life stages. Just like birds, just like crocodilians, they're kind of evolutionary neighbors. So in one sense, it's not that surprising. And we know why birds vocalize. We know what we think why crocodiles vocalize. But why do turtles vocalize? Why are they doing it? I mean, usually in the context of vocalizations, or often in the context of crocodilian vocalizations, it has to do with parental care. Same with chicks communicating with their parents, that has to do with parental care. But if turtles are vocalizing at the hatchling life stage when there's no parental care, what are they doing? It's a completely different context, right? Okay, so one idea is that, well, because their parents abandoned them, the turtles are left, alone in this nest. And they all hatch, and they somehow have to get out of the nest. And can you imagine being like buried alive with a whole bunch of your siblings and trying to get out? What would you do? Well, you'd probably panic and try to do something. But, another strategy might be to communicate with your neighbors and try to coordinate digging out of the nest. We know for sure that group digging saves energy, and it can also save lives. Those individuals that are left behind by the group when they're digging out of the nest are often entombed in the nest and can no longer get out without the group, at least in the larger plant species like sea turtles. So one hypothesis is that vocalization in hatchling turtles occurs, perhaps in part, to help coordinate movements and get out of the nest. So there might be an elaborate kind of social behavior going on underneath the soil. How do you study that? It's hard. It's really hard. But Claudia was a really, really smart cookie, and she figured out, how to do this. So one thing we did was first characterize the vocal repertoire of snapping turtles. Nobody really knows what they even sound like because nobody's studied them and tried to kind of describe what they sound like. So she set up a camera, and she got a nest of snapping turtle eggs in the lab. And she put a microphone into this nest. The turtles can't see red light. And then she took a time-lapse video here just to see what it looks like in terms of the turtles actually trying to get out of the nest. So here the eggs are hatching, and all of a sudden you notice that they're all kind of hatching together, and the turtles all start moving and trying to get out of the nest. So because she did this, she was able to tell when the turtles were moving and kind of coordinate that with when they were producing some of these vocalizations. So first, I'm going to share with you some of these vocalizations. So you, lucky folks, are among the first people in the world to hear this. This study was published not too long ago, but let's be honest. People are looking at cat videos on the internet and Taylor Swift. They're not like downloading our paper and listening to snapping turtles. So there's very few people in the world that have actually heard baby snapping turtles talk before. So if you turn up the volume, or maybe you don't need to turn up the volume on your computer, with any luck, you'll be hearing snapping turtles vocalizing to each other. So you're going to hear a pop at first. That's just the start of the recording. Then in the middle of the recording, which is really quick, you'll hear a vocalization. Then at the end of the recording, there'll be another thump, and that's just the end of the recording. So that's kind of sounds like, one of those maracas or things that you run a stick across. That's one of the vocalization. Here's another one. This one is more of a squeak, I think. Sure. Kind of sounds like a bird. And this one sounds like more of a So in total, we got we characterized 5 different vocalizations that they produce in the nest. You just heard baby turtles talk. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Oops, I need to somehow move my slide. I realized this is a problem. Hold on a second here. So we have those 5 different vocalizations. By virtue of studying them, having the camera in the nest, we could actually figure out when they were producing them. So what we realize is that before the eggs even hatch, they're starting to vocalize to each other. They're starting to talk to each other. They're doing something. They're getting ready. And that's kind of described right here in this vocalization count graph. You can see at the pre-pip stage, so that's the pre-hatching stage, we're starting to get this type 1 vocalization that's produced. Once they start hatching, they're not producing just type 1 vocalizations anymore. They're producing the gamut of them. They're producing a whole bunch of different types of vocalizations to each other for some reason. And then once they're emerging, they're reverting back really to that type 1 vocalization for some reason. And they're producing at a lower frequency, I guess I should say, different types of vocalizations. So they really start to diversify their vocalizations once the eggs hatch. Presumably, you can imagine that the more complex the thing that you're trying to do, the more diverse your vocal repertoire would have to be, right? And so I won't go into the details, but Claudia did a subsequent study where in the field, she put a number of recorders into the soil, and she was able to deduce that the amount of movement that occurred in the hatchlings in the nest after they hatched was very positively related to the number of vocalizations they made in the same time frame. So in other words, whenever they're moving in the nest, they're vocalizing as well. Whenever they're not moving, they're generally not vocalizing. Again, suggesting that they're coordinating this movement behavior to get out of the nest more efficiently. So yeah, if you didn't know that, turtles talk, and they talk a lot. They talk to each other, and they're doing really interesting things. And of course, the vocalizations that they produce are different at the hatchling stage and at the adult stage. So at the adult stage, they're using their vocalizations for something completely different, which is really interesting. It's really cool to be, studying this, the vocalizations in particular, because it's really an emerging field, at least in terms of reptiles and amphibians. And there's all kinds of interesting things going. All right, so I'll do this last one. I've been going for about 38 minutes. I'm going to do this last one quickly because it's a little bit horrific, but it's also really kind of interesting, especially in the sense that what we're looking at is the painted turtle, which is, it's kind of like the most unexciting turtle in the world because it's the best studied turtle in the world. Like, what could we possibly not know about the painted turtle? It's across North America. Everybody and their uncle studies it. We know everything about it. And this goes back to even, even with respect to mate choice, we think we know what the mating system looks like. So how females choose males or vice versa, right? And it goes back to Darwin. Darwin thought that he knew that he understood painted turtles, especially with respect to the mating season. So he says, female choice characterizes the mating strategy of the painted turtles. Females select males based on a courtship display, titillation, involving the use of their elongated foreclaws. And you can see those elongated foreclaws right here. I'm going to try, I wonder if this is going to work. I'm going to try to share this video. You guys can't see this video though, can you, right? No? Or yes?
We're seeing a Zoom, like a YouTube screen,
Oh, great. Okay, ready?
and pretty
Okay.
sure everybody's seeing it, but now it's full screen. Not sure if we're getting any audio, but
It's okay. We don't need the audio. So yeah,
okay.
if you can see the screen, this is perfect. You can see the male, at least on my left, he's more in the screen, and he's vibrating his claws in the face of the female, right? And the female's getting all excited. She's like, oh boy, here we go. And she's, she likes this male, and presumably they're gonna mate. And this is what we thought characterized the mating system of painted turtles for over 100 years. This is the titillation that Darwin was describing. All right. Oops, how do I get out of here? No, I want you to stop. No, I can't stop you. How do I get out of this? Oh, I see. Yeah, there we go. Great. Okay, so now you can see the screen again, right? The presentation screen. All right, so
Now we're back to your screen.
Perfect. But if we go into even really old drawings of painted turtles, what do we see? Well, here's a drawing from 1835. This is a drawing of presumably a male, because the male has these elongated claws. But why does it look like Dracula otherwise? Look at its mouth. It has fangs. It has these sharp, stabby things on its nuchal scute. It has like serrated nuchal scutes that look like, spears. What is that? And so this is a case where, something interesting is going on right under our noses, and we didn't know it until a phenomenal, natural historian, Patrick Muldoon, came along and explained to the world what was actually going on and what we were seeing. So in fact, when we're holding these turtles in Algonquin Park, we see those serrated scutes, but we just don't think anything of them. We're just like, yeah, males and females are different, because females don't have those serrated scutes. But Patrick pointed out that, well, they probably have a function, and he studied it really thoroughly, and this is what he came up with. So if you look at the male painted turtles, they very often have these fangs, tomidonts, they're called, enlarged tomidonts. And they also have these serrated nuchal scutes that look like spears. And of course, the females down here, you can see that she does not have these spear-like scutes. So it's a sexually dimorphic thing. The males look different than the females. And we also notice that, of course, the females have all these bite marks on the back of their neck, which is kind of strange. What's going on there? So it seems that, there is one mating strategy for the turtles, and it is to kind of titillate the females. But there's also this alternate mating strategy where the male bites the female, holds on with these vampire-like fangs, and uses its giant spear to kind of cut the female. So I'm going to show you video what that looks like. Whoops, wrong video. I'll have to go back a slide. This video. So the male is in red there, and the female's in white. The male actually has a hold of the female by the back of the neck, and now he's going back and forth and jabbing and hitting the female with that serrated spear that's part of its shell. And this is something we didn't, this is the remarkable thing about this is that this is like one of the best studied, reptiles in the world, certainly one of the best studied turtles in the world. And yet there's this fundamental aspect of its behavior and of its morphology that links to this behavior that was right under our noses for, a century. And, nobody investigated it until, one person came along and thought, hey, that's funny. Maybe we should look into that. And it completely changed our understanding of the mating system, again, in one of these best studied turtles in the world. Whoa, rounded neon blue in the background. That's an interesting screensaver. All right. Get rid of that and that. Yes, there we go. Okay, so I've been going for almost 45 minutes. So it turns out Darwin, was not correct about that one. He was right about everything else, but wrong about turtles. So there you have it. So there's kind of 4 interesting stories that emerge as a part of doing kind of, science up in Algonquin Park. My group, again, is full of people that are really interested in the natural world, and stories like this certainly don't escape them. And they're certainly interesting to look into, because not only are they kind of interesting notes, sometimes they fundamentally change our understanding of the system that we're studying and lead to really, really interesting new questions. The best scientists out there, I think, are really, really good natural historians, especially as exemplified by Patrick Muldoon, who did a lot of this work. So yeah, there you have it. My group and I are incredibly lucky that we get to spend a lot of time in Algonquin Park. And I'm incredibly lucky that you all invited me to speak to you today, because the Wye-Marsh and natural history is a huge part of my life. It's a shame I couldn't be there in person, but I'm nevertheless thankful that you invited me. I want to thank Patrick Muldoon, Claudia Lacroix, Matt Keevil, who did some of the snapping turtle work, and my collaborator Jackie Litzkus, who kind of co-supervises these long-term studies of turtles. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, and I'd say that I think there are a couple of questions in the chat already, but if people have other questions, throw them in the chat. Or if you use reaction to raise your hand, we can recognize you. Pat, and Niall, why don't you stop sharing your screen so they can see a sort of full face? And I have to say, you mentioned we did have the great pleasure of having Patrick Muldowan do a talk for us a couple of years ago. And yeah, certainly an excellent naturalist as well. And I believe we got somebody coming up who I think was one of your students as well, Nicholas Epelar.
Yep. Yeah.
He's going to be doing a Zoom presentation for us next month. He's working out in Grasslands Provincial Park, but I think he did some work with you in Algonquin Park as well.
Great. Yeah.
Anyway, great presentation. Um, I might take the privilege of asking the first question. People were thrilled to hear the turtle talk. How do they do it? How do they produce the sound?
Good question. We don't know. They don't have vocal cords. So they're doing, something else. I don't know. That comes down to looking at the an anatomy, and that's definitely not my specialty. Oh
That
yeah, so
hasn't been,
go ahead.
oh, maybe it hasn't been looked at yet, or
Probably not. Yeah, I mean, maybe people who know about the physiology of turtles and the anatomy of turtles can deduce it without kind of too much effort, but it's not something that I'm familiar with. Yeah.
well, now let me go into the chat here and see what's come up. Hang on. Uh, Dorothy's worried that the predators are going to hear these baby turtles and track them down. Do predators respond to the vocalizations? We had a hard time hearing them, so I assume the raccoons would have just as hard a time. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is actually something we tried to study at one point, and it was a dismal failure. It didn't work. We tried to put recording things in the ground and start playing them back to see if the predators would be attracted to these recordings within the ground, and it didn't work. So the bottom line is we don't know. We know that there seems to be a peak in nest predation right after the nests are laid. Then it seems like if they don't get predated within the next, within 24 hours of being laid, they're generally pretty safe until they start hatching. And it's not clear to us if it's the process of actually hatching and the noise and the scents that are released that attracts predators at that point, or if it's vocalizations. I suspect the smell would carry further, like the smell of eggs hatching and coming might emanate from the soil and emanate a bit further than the vocalization. So I suspect it's more so the smell. And once the smell is out there, maybe it's a matter of time and you really want to be efficient in being able to get out of the nest, right? And maybe that's another reason why vocalizations might be important. But yeah, we're not sure, to be honest. I'm just kind of speculating on that.
And a question here from Ron Prickett. What can we do to protect turtles from predation, especially otters? Now, I know, a lot of us have been involved in protecting turtle nests from predation, mostly from raccoons around here with the cages. But the otters are getting them, the adults, when they're hibernating. Can anything be done to help them with that, or should it be
Well,
done?
there's a long-standing joke, which I'm sure isn't true, that whenever Ron Brooks would see an otter near the road, he'd swerve, towards it because they of course decimated his population. I'm sure that's not true, but no, I don't think there's anything we can do. This is otters have been eating turtles for millennia. If populations are low, it's largely because of us. And then otters might give them, the final death blow. But I don't think it's something that we can really control or predict. It's really difficult to predict where and when the otters are going to be because they often move around a lot. So I don't think it would be an effective, uh, you know, uh, a conservation strategy to do anything about the otters. I think an effective conservation strategy might more fundamentally do with us and what we do, especially trying to curb mortality that occurs on roads. And I know a lot of really smart people are working on that, and it's just one of these difficult things that we have to figure out.
David Seaburn asks, is there any evidence that adult turtles are making vocalizations?
Yes, lots. Yeah, snapping turtles make really gnarly adult vocalizations. It's like, oh, it's wild. And same with painted turtles, they make same kind of chitters and cheeps. Uh, we've done some work on the adults. in brief, in painted turtles, males do something a little bit differently than females. Largely, there's a large amount of overlap between the types of vocalizations they produce, but males have a little bit more variation in their vocalization. And that's consistent with males being or vocalizations being under sexual selection in some capacity. So they're used in mating, which makes sense. In snapping turtles, we did an interesting study where we exposed snapping turtles to a model, like a 3D printed turtle. And what happened was females decreased the frequency of vocalizations, like decreased the number of vocalizations they were making when they saw the model, whereas males increased it. So we suspect that males were kind of exploring it, seeing if it was a female or if it was a male that they might want to be aggressive towards, whereas females either lost interest because they thought it was another female, or females thought it was a male and they wanted to avoid detection because, of course, they can store sperm for a long time. They don't need to mate very often, and when they do mate, again, sometimes it's not. Sometimes, the males bite them and things, so it's a little bit costly for them to mate. So there's a number of reasons why females might not want to be detected, or they might lose interest in the model if they think it's another female, if there's no social interactions, right? So.
Now, a couple of people here are wondering if there's a relationship, and this might be hard to speculate on, but between climate change and the otter's success in predating turtles. I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've only seen them kind of on the ice, somehow using an existing hole. I don't think they break through thick ice themselves. But if for example, there weren't ice covering the lakes, and that's probably what's going to happen in the near-term climate. It probably just facilitates the otters exploring these still winter lakes that are still cold enough for the turtles to be inactive in them and to predate them. The only difficulty the otter would have is that they'd have to drag them all the way to shore instead of straight up onto the ice. But I'd say if anything, it would maybe facilitate it. But I'm just totally speculating.
Our president, Bob Codd, has raised his hand, wants to ask a question. Go ahead, Bob.
It's more of a clarification. So you were talking about the painted turtles and having these pointed scutes and biting the females. I just don't understand how that facilitates breeding. Like, why is this appealing to the females? Doesn't seem very appealing to me.
No, it's not. So there's two different types of two kind of fundamentally different spectrums, two ends of a spectrum in the mate choice thing. There's female choice, where the female chooses the male based on really attractive characteristics. And the other end of the scale is female coercion. So in other words, the female has had enough and she'll mate with the male just to get the male to stop, bashing her with his shell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice, simple explanation. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I might leave you up there, Bob, just for the wrap up. But let's see the few more questions here. Anthony Taliana wants to know when he should go to Bat Lake to see all these spotted salamanders breeding. You have to go in the middle of the night, don't you?
Yeah, you have to be there at night, and you have to, it would be in the spring. And so there is a trail on Bat Lake where you are allowed to walk. You wouldn't be allowed to go off the trail and explore in the lake, but there's a little what do you call it, dock that you can go onto, and you can observe the salamanders from there. And sometimes there is activity around that dock, but it would have to be, at ice out, and you'd have to be there on the right night. And it's often, it's going to be cold and rainy, and you'll be miserable with the rest of us out there because that's the kind of weather they like to breed in. But
Bat Lake's a great spot for dragonflies as well. And it's a nice trail around there. There was something else here. David Hawk wants to know which species of salamander was found in the pitcher plant leaves.
Oh, there are all the ones that I know of are spotted salamanders. I think there might be a few blue spotteds. I'd be surprised if there weren't, because both species breed in the lake. But primarily we were focused on the spotted salamanders, the yellow spots.
So, if anybody else has any questions, either raise your hand or Paul. Your dad has a question. Let's get him up here. A second.
Just a question. I used to sort of say to people the only sound I ever thought that a turtle made was a hissing sound when you picked them up. That's the only sound I've ever heard. But do they all hiss if they are threatened, or is the sound that they make when they are threatened different for the different species?
Good question. I think so. Some people wouldn't characterize a hiss as a vocalization, and I'm not sure exactly why they don't think it's because it's more of like air passing and not. It's pretty generic. I suspect a majority of turtles would be able to hiss. Um, um, but I think people like that are really hardcore into behavioral ecology and the vocalization stuff would not categorize a hiss per se as a vocalization for reasons that escape me. So, but yeah, you know, probably all of them hiss. Even like snakes will hiss, mice will hiss, everything will hiss a little bit.
Is that a raised hand?
Yes, please. Regarding my climate change question, yeah, we had a speaker who was talking about reptiles, and he said that in his area, which I think was near Guelph, that the warmer winters was resulting in less ice, so there was a lot more otter predation in his area. I could put you in.
If you put me in contact with them, I would be very much appreciative of that. Because I know
Yeah,
something that the whole group is really interested in this auto predation thing. So you've been
Oh,
muted.
I think you just got muted again there.
Cool. Great.
Maybe she's okay.
Yeah.
Pat File has a question. Let me find Pat here.
Yes, thank you. Somebody gave me a raised hand. I didn't know how to do it. I recall actually we had Ron Brooks come as a speaker. It would have been probably about 25 years ago. I studied well myself, and he was our animal evolution professor, and it was particularly sad the whole talk because he did talk about those. The one time they came on the site of the turtles that were still alive that were on the ice and had been eviscerated. And you could tell that it had been a very demoralizing and very sad moment for all of him and his students, because these were turtles that they had been monitoring for many years. And, it was very sad. But he also had, equally sad, pictures of tracks on cars swerving, to actually hit turtles, like where human beings had deliberately killed turtles, and just to kind of,
Yep.
Talking about the kind of, who would do that, kind of thing. But at the end, we asked him about, his hopes for the future, and he thought during his lifetime we would see some of these turtles go extinct, like that. Like he was so discouraged at the loss of habitat and the issues affecting the turtles, which he listed much as you have. Where do you think we're at now, you and your students and the work that you're doing in terms of the level of risk that all of these turtles are at? And is there more we can be doing in terms of the species at risk legislation, or other ways at which habitat protection could be done, or what are some of the strategies now that you're that are being advocated to try to help the turtles? And I really enjoyed your presentation. I wonder if Dr. Brooks got to hear about the talking turtles.
He was in his later years, he was skeptical of the talking turtles because of course he'd never heard it and he'd worked so closely with them, right? But it was just I guess he wasn't at the right place at the right time, or yeah, anyway. But yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a lot more awareness now than there used to be. There's, save the turtle signs everywhere. There's much more community engagement with protecting nests, all of which is great news. I feel though that's at the same time, there's at least as much kind of bad news, like habitat is deteriorating, equally, if not more rapidly. The climate is changing rapidly. And so part of me wants to answer it in this way. I feel like, in possibly within my lifetime, there's going to be problems enough that turtle conservation will be so far down the laundry list of things we have to deal with that there wouldn't be much hope for that, because we'll be thinking more about much larger issues that relate to ourselves. In the near term, though, I'm hopeful that with this continued education, that people will continue to be aware and will continue to advocate and will continue to protect nests and head start these turtles. As low as juvenile survival is, really, it's nest survival, plays a large part in that high juvenile mortality, or that high early life mortality. So by protecting nests, I think it does make a bit of a difference in terms of being able to help these populations persist. So it's not futile, even though they have these high juvenile mortalities, right? I think I'm a little bit more optimistic about some things than Ron Brook was. He was a notorious pessimist, but at the same time, yeah, a lot of it is just kind of, I hope things are changing in the right direction. But I think that's how I'd answer that. But it's a good question. It's yeah.
I think we'll wrap up, unless anybody's got a burning question. We'll wrap up with just a couple of little questions here. Just if anybody does have a burning question, when we say raise your hand, we're talking about an electronic hand. You have to find that reaction, because if you just raise your hand on camera, I probably won't see you. But if there's somewhere on your screen, there should be some reactions, and you can raise an electronic hand. But the last two questions here that I've got are, I think some people, they saw people, some of your students with live snapping turtles on their laps, and they were worried. And the question is, how do you handle a snapping turtle? How dangerous it is to pick up a snapping turtle?
So all of my students are very experienced at picking up snapping turtles. They're trained by senior graduate students or myself. And so they know what they're doing. One thing I wouldn't recommend is picking up a snapping turtle on the side of the road, sitting in a lawn chair and putting it on your lap, unless you know what you're doing. Really, probably the best way to move a snapping turtle off the road is if you have a big board and you're able to kind of maybe put it under the snapping turtle and bring it across that way. That's one safe way for you, I guess, of moving it across. If you really have to pick it up, don't pick it up by the tail. You pick it up by the back, the shell at the back, near the back leg pockets. And don't underestimate how heavy the turtle is, though, because you don't want to end up picking up too high and dropping it. But you pick it up from the back carapace that's near the back leg pockets. Be prepared to be scratched, though, because they will often scratch your hands while doing that. That would be the safest way to pick up a turtle. Once you're a bit more experienced, you sometimes can kind of get around the sides and do it too, but again, you're going to get scratched probably worse there. So, the other thing to do if you really want to move that turtle is just try and encourage it to move and try to kind of walk it off the path or walk it off the road.
So I think Bob's going to come and thank you for your presentation, but just we have a couple other things before we say goodnight to everybody. So hang around, and we will ask if anybody, we usually every month we do sightings, and Bob's going to ask people if they want to raise hand and tell anything they've been seeing. But I'll maybe close off my reaction to Niall's talk with a quote from the Bible. This is from the Song of Solomon. Lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. We're all looking forward to that. The time of the singing of birds has come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. So with that, let's turn it over to Bob.
Nice quote, Ken. I like that. I don't know what to say. This was a great presentation, really engaging. I learned a lot. You could have gone on twice as long, and I wouldn't have objected. I know Ken and I discussed before the meeting that we usually give our guest speakers an honorarium. You sort of declined that, but I don't know where we stand with that yet. So we'll have to wrestle with you about how we're going to deal with that. But all I can say is thank you very much for a very informative and pleasurable presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And you know what we could do? We could just, if you could give it to me, and then I could just donate it to you guys. I don't understand taxes, but maybe I get a tax break. I don't know. So
we're not a charity, so you don't get any breaks from us.
okay, whatever. I'll donate it back to you guys though. There you go.
All right. Anyway, thank you again very much. And as Ken alluded to, we wouldn't be a nature club if we didn't have sightings. So stick around and raise your hand if you have a sighting you want to report. I think it's probably better if I leave it to Ken to organize that because he's got control over muting everybody and highlighting speakers. So
yeah, and if people stick around, I'm going to share some of the sightings we had on our Christmas bird count. But speak up, everybody. What have you seen? What's going on out there? Where's Chris Evans? You must have seen something, Chris.
Yes,
Yes,
Chris.
I did a little ski in Menacing Wetlands a few days ago, and I saw bald eagle and 5 rough-legged hawks and about 16 or 18 ravens. So it was quite, and lots of interesting animal tracks, fishers, and I didn't see a fox. I saw coyotes and ermine. Well, it could have been a long-tailed weasel too. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, Chris kind of introduced me to skiing down in the Minising Marsh, and it's if anybody likes to cross country ski in unusual places, it's a great place to go. You go, I think probably that there's different places you can access it, but a lot of people know Strongville Road. If you go to the end of Strongville Road, you can hop on a bunch of snowmobile trails and get out to parts of the marsh that you can only go when it's frozen. And there's usually lots of rough-leg hawks and lots of porcupines there. So, okay, David Hawk has some things to tell us. Just a second here, Dave.
Okay. Just quick, I was out getting the mail out of my mailbox today, and I happened to look up above me, and here's a barred owl sitting on the telephone line, looking down at me. Not too concerned. So that was pretty cool. I do worry about them a bit. I'm near Colson, between Colson and Horseshoe Valley Resort, and we've had over 50 inches of snowfall here now. It has settled. We now have 20 inches of settled snow in the field. So the barred owl, the coyote, they're having a tough time now finding the meadow voles. When it gets a little more firm, they can actually hear them tunneling under the snow. But right now, it's got to be tough going for these predators because this continuous snowfall has really put a big fluffy layer out there.
Are you worried about the voles at all? It must be kind of hard work for them moving around in all that snow too, but they're good at it.
I think pretty good. They can tunnel really well. It's when that snow melts and then freezes as ice. That's when the meadow voles have a tough go. Or if they encounter like a snowmobile trail where the snow's been packed and then that freezes and they tunnel through the fluffy field, hit the snowmobile track, then they got to expose themselves to run across it, and that's where the barred owl wins. It'll see these meadow voles up on top of the pack snow.
Anybody else got anything to share? You can unmute yourself if you just want to shout it out or raise that electronic hand.
I have a question for David Hawk. Did the barred owl get any mail?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Did the barred owl get which?
Get any mail when you were checking the mail?
No, no. This is why I was looking around in disgust. And oh, there's an owl. That makes up for coming out to the mailbox.
Bob, did you raise your hand again, Bob?
I did, but let Pat go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we went on a vacation this Christmas, and the highlight of our trip, it was to a Sandos Caracol Eco Resort in Mexico. And there was loads of turtles on the resort, and it was lovely to see all the little children standing on the bridges, just eagerly excited looking at these turtles swimming kind of below the bridges. And we got to go on a tour that was to swim in the ocean with turtles. And so we saw amazing, like huge ocean turtles. And you had to hold your hand up like this if somebody saw a turtle, because everybody had snorkeling and stuff, and you'd swim over to see where it might be. So it was a very big highlight of our trip. So apropos this night, it was a really exciting opportunity.
And who was that? I couldn't find you.
Oh,
Who was it?
it's Pat. I have a bad cold coming out of that
Pat,
trip. That's why you don't recognize my voice.
is it Pat File or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Anybody else? Well, I'm going to try to share my screen here.
Wait a
And,
minute. What about me?
oh, go ahead, Bob. Oh, right, you raised your hand. Okay, go ahead.
I do. I do. I'll put it down and raise it again if that helps.
No, you're good.
Anyway, this is really not a recent sighting at all. But Paul Rollinson's story about the poor turtle he kept relocating brought to mind a sighting that Sue and I had quite a number of years ago down near Myrtle Beach. We were walking along the beach and we saw this small, what I thought at the time was a turtle. And my instinct was to pick it up and take it and put it back in the ocean. But we didn't. We stopped and we watched it for a while, and it was heading away from the ocean, and I couldn't understand why. And after looking at it, not that long, we realized it wasn't a turtle at all, but it was a tortoise. It was a diamondback terrapin, a very small one. And I would have done it a great disservice if I'd picked it up and put it in the ocean. So sometimes the best way to help wildlife is just to leave them alone. They know what they're doing. We don't. That's all I got.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, I'm going to try to share my screen, and we'll just wrap things up with a few little photos from our Christmas bird count. So give me a second to figure this out. Are we seeing that?
Yep.
Let's see if I can get it full screen. How's that? No, that's just zooming in. Give me a second here.
Yeah. It wasn't very ballsy.
Oh, well, I'll just go from here. Um, so as Dave Scanlon, we had a um, pretty good Christmas bird count. It was our second highest number of individual birds ever. And I think one of our highest species count as well. And we had, unlike a lot of the other Christmas bird counts in the area, we actually had good weather. We had, uh, my team was doing Midland Bay, and we had quite a few of these red-breasted mergansers on the bay. Uh, not as many as I'd seen a few days before. A few days before the count, I had about 200 on the bay, but I think we counted over 70. That's another merganser. Are you seeing this okay, Bob?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
There's a female merganser with part of the dock gang down by the coal dock. That's a little bench they have in the coal dock where the old guys sit and
I've
drink
seen it.
coffee, fish. And we popped over to somebody's feeder in our area and had 2 or 3 wild turkeys at the feeder. There they are. And my group, we were pleased to get, we had 2 Cooper's hawks down by the grain elevators in Midland. This one was a juvenile, and it was the second one we saw. And I'm not sure if it had, you see all the blood on its breast. I'm not sure if it had made the kill, but I think just before it landed in this tree, we had saw it interacting with an adult Cooper's hawk. And I wondered whether maybe the adult had fed this juvenile something. That's the juvenile again. But in the same area on top of the grain elevator, we saw this adult Cooper's hawk as well. And we had lots of eagles in our area, but on the count as well. I think we we tied our record on the count for the number of bald eagles. I didn't get, I always say Christmas bird counts are not the greatest time to get great photographs because you're often kind of moving on, just trying to see as many birds, and you don't kind of wait around to get that perfect shot. But we did see, I think our group counted 4 bald eagles hunting and harassing ducks on Midland Bay that morning. There's an adult bald eagle that was harassing some of the ducks on Midland Bay. And Paula Shepard gave us these photos of a red-tailed hawk that she spotted. I think this is the cemetery on King Street across from the Baptist church. And it looks to have had made some sort of kill as well. I'm not sure what it has in its talons there. And this was another red-tailed hawk that we got down by that big cell tower down by Midland Harbor. And we did get 1 barred owl on the count. I think the Jen Fillingham and Ed Smith got this one down by Orr Lake. It was the only barred owl we got on the count, but it wasn't the only owl because we also got this one, Bubo plasticus. We got this down by the sailing club at Midland Harbor, and Claire was quite excited when we saw this from a distance. When we got a little closer, we weren't quite as excited. But and we on the count we set a record for the number of red-bellied woodpeckers on the count. This year we counted 18 over the area. I think our old record was 16 back last year, 2023. Always a beautiful bird, and there seems to be a few more of them every year in our area. We also set a record for pileated woodpeckers on the count, with 20 on the count. The old record was 14 in 2020. That's a little brown creeper, and I could have got a much better shot if we'd hung around and waited for better light or a better angle. But I think you can see him on the tree bark there. And I was quite pleased to add 1 American robin to the count because I had scouted out this bird a couple of days before at Pedersen Park. And it would be nice if I can find him again on the count. And when we got to Pedersen Park, there wasn't too much there, but I played 1 little robin call, and this guy popped right up, and we were able to add him to the count. Heather Gray Toner gave this photo of one of the female house finches she spotted. And in our little group, there's only so many spots that you're actually going to see house sparrows in Midland. They're not at all the feeders and that. So when we're walking by the grain elevators, we make sure we counted a few house sparrows because it's probably the only spot we're going to see them in our area. There's other spots in the circle where they're plentiful, but another house sparrow. And we set a record for northern cardinals on the count. This is Heather's photo. I think we had 46 on the account. Our old record was 38 last year in 2023. And the big bird of the count. This is Chris. Are you there, Chris? Do you want to tell us about this bird?
Sure. So Ian Cook, the little story, the short story is that we were driving along, and this was at the end of the Jackson's Point, I think it's called.
No, that's in there.
No, I think it's Jackson's. It's a park, Jackson's Park, at the end of the 8th concession. And I saw these flock of 7 cedar waxwings fly over the car. And but I didn't recognize them in flight. I should have, but I didn't, and stopped, and we actually re-spotted them, and they really fortunately they circled around and they landed in a tree, and then there was another bird that came in and landed with them, and it seemed to be flying similarly but different. And the long and the short of it is Ian, I said, I think it's just a bigger cedar waxwing, and I could see a crest on it that it was actually just part of the tree that I was seeing. So, but Ian said, no, that's not that. And so we eventually watched it for a while, and it was separated itself from the group, and we eventually deduced that it was actually trying to drive away these cedar waxwings from its food source, which was a juniper tree there. So it was quite an exciting finding, and we were really pleased that we
We
saw.
better tell them what it is, Chris.
Oh, the Townsend solitaire.
Townsend solitaire, yeah.
Yeah.
First time ever on the Midland-Penetanguishene Christmas bird count, and
My
not a
first
bird.
in Ontario.
Yeah, not a bird that a lot of people expect to see in a Christmas bird count. And the nice thing was that after Chris and Ian and their team found this bird, it did hang around for a week or so, and lots of birders came from all over to see it. And the neighbors in the area were very welcoming to some of the birders that showed up on their street to look for this kind of robin-sized bird. Did you hear it sing when you first spotted it?
We heard it was calling quite a bit because it was we thought it was maybe scolding us, but it was we believe that it was actually scolding and trying to drive off these cedar waxwings. We got several views of it. It first when after we first kind of recognized it and thought we need to get a picture of this. It turned up in this juniper tree, and but it was giving us very great little views of it briefly, but not enough time to get a picture of it. So eventually, I did play a Townsend solitaire, and it immediately jumped out of the tree and started to then scold us. And we managed to get these photographs of it finally. But
Yeah, apparently they're very territorial birds. That's why they're called a solitaire, because they don't even like being around other solitaires. They drive other solitaires away. So usually you only just see one of them. Thanks, Chris.
It did move on.
Thanks for finding that great bird for us.
Well, thanks for inviting us and changing your day to your count so we could participate. We really enjoyed it. Thanks to Dave for extending that invitation, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Yeah.
So moving on, just some photos of some of the team. I think this is the Area 6 team that did Orr Lake. Patrick Jackson, who used to work at the Y Marsh, and Chase Moser, and I think that's Ed Smith. They sent us a photo of a white-tailed deer they saw in their area. Oh, when we were down at the coal dock, one of the old fishermen there really wanted to show us his picture of a northern pike that he had caught a couple of days before, I guess. It's hard to tell from the photo, but it was quite a large pike. There's Patrick's team again down by Orr Lake. That's me, I think, taking a photograph of the robin down at Pedersen Park. And that's my group. We started out the morning at the old coal dock at the mouth of Midland Harbor. And I don't know if you can see, but we actually had quite a lot of waterfowl there. It was nice to have the water open and a beautiful sunny morning. That's Susan and Lane. And then, of course, after the count, we party. This is the Christmas party. Good attendance. And again at the Christmas party, we do our mystery gift auction. That's the gift table of stuff that was going to come up from auction. That's the spread that was put out. There's Dave Scanlon reading off some of the reports for the Christmas bird count, and Dave's suitably and festively attired. And there's our erstwhile auctioneer, Mr. Codd, who I think he did set a record for the most funds raised this year, $710. I don't know what was in that present.
Did you?
But Eileen got a nice present here. Look at that beautiful
birdhouse.
Birdhouse, yeah. I said Eileen lives right on the water, and I thought if she puts that up on her front porch, she might attract some of the sailors to stop by, if not the birds. And this was probably the highlight gift of the evening. It wasn't beautifully wrapped, was it? but it ended up with the Scanlons, and we're glad they got it because of all the work they do. Because look at this beautiful gift they got. Lovely quilt, and it's, of course, these are mystery gifts. We're not supposed to know who made them or donated them. But if you look at that lady in the red sweater at the end of the table, I think Ruth might have had something to do with that lovely present. It's Ruth Deebs. So I think, let me see if I can learn how to stop sharing. I think that's about it. Anybody else got anything before we say goodnight?
I'm good. You want to wrap it up? Thanks everybody for joining us on the first Zoom meeting of 2025.
Yeah, and our next one will still be on Zoom February 20th, and it'll be Nicholas E. Pilar talking about Saskatchewan Grasslands National Park. So see everybody then. Good night.
Thank you, Ken.